There are committee amendments pending, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Senator Brandt, you are recognized to open on LB 543.
Good afternoon, colleagues. Today I'm bringing LB 543 for your consideration. I would like to thank the Judiciary Committee for advancing LB 543, the Agricultural Equipment Right to Repair Act. In January of 2020, I asked a representative of a major equipment manufacturer when farmers and third-party mechanics would be able to fully repair their own ag equipment. They responded that the industry was working to have a right to repair available across the country by January of 2021. As of January 2021, nothing had been done, so we introduced LB 543, the Agricultural Equipment Right to Repair Act, which, quote, will allow owners and third-party mechanics the ability to repair agricultural machinery back to manufacturer specifications, unquote. The hearing was held last year in the Judiciary Committee, and after the hearing, the original equipment manufacturers, or OEMs, asked that the bill be held in committee to allow them time to come up with a national solution. We agreed. For the past year, American Farm Bureau Federation and the OEMs have been working on a memorandum of understanding that would create a nationwide right to repair policy. To date, not much has been forthcoming. Therefore, I ask that LB 543 be advanced from committee and be named my personal priority for 2022. I'm asking you to consider a simple bill. This is about securing our food supply. Let me use this example. Imagine a farmer stranded in their field staring at the crop they were going to harvest until a component on the combine failed. They know exactly how to replace it, they have the parts to replace it, and they achieve this in a matter of hours. After the defective part is replaced, they unfortunately do not have access to the software tool that allows the computer on the combine to accept or reboot this replacement component. The producer calls dealership after dealership praying a service technician is available to access the onboard computer and allow the combine to accept this new part. However, no technician is available to make a service call for 1 to 3 days. By then, weather conditions could have caused extreme field loss or created conditions that prevent harvest, creating a revenue loss. Adding insult to injury, the implement owner must still pay a dealership to reset the combine's computer after making the necessary repairs himself. The dealership then sends out a technician with a laptop computer to plug into the machine to reset the machine computer to accept the new part. The producer is charged from the time the tech leaves the dealership until he returns, often costing hundreds of dollars. The goal of this bill is to protect competition, not prevent it, as is happening today. Profiteering by OEMs not only affects farmers, but also local ag equipment repair shops that are not affiliated with dealers, often known as third-party mechanics. Today, these shops are effectively locked out from completing repairs they are qualified to perform, repairs they can complete when they are provided with the appropriate manufacturer resources. This creates a monopoly where only dealers fix the equipment they sell, and farmers and local repair shops have no competitive resources. While dealers should be able to service their customers' equipment, dealers should not be the only avenue for servicing equipment. Implement owners deserve to have options just as car and truck owners do today in Nebraska. In 2012, one state passed an Automobile and Light Truck Right to Repair Act. Because this one state passed a meaningful right to repair legislation, the entire automotive industry, Ford, GM, Chrysler, and the foreign car companies, signed a memorandum of understanding agreement that allows owners and independent mechanics access to the digital tools necessary to repair their own vehicles. Nebraska has thousands of independent mechanics running shops throughout the state today because of the car and light truck MOU. This is the reason an owner of a car pickup or a third-party mechanic can purchase diagnostic repairs from independent auto parts stores or tool vendors nationwide. If cars and pickups have the right to repair, why can't farm equipment? Farmers in Nebraska have shared stories with me about standing up and being heard on this issue. Because they had the courage to speak up, they tell me they have been retaliated against by the local dealership who refuses to sell them the necessary parts. In Europe, OEMs are required to make repair software available. Americans are buying it there and bringing it back to the states, creating a gray market. LB543 would stop that in Nebraska. The equipment manufacturers, dealers, and farmers are tied together as partners in producing large quantities of high-quality, affordable foodstuffs. Historically, all the partners have worked well together. This partnership has been strained by the reluctance of equipment makers to provide the necessary digital repair equipment. What the people of Nebraska need to understand is, unlike the automotive side, where you can purchase repairs from independent auto parts stores, ag equipment owners must purchase virtually all repairs from the local dealership, whether this bill passes or not. This is aggravated by the fact that there are very few dealers left in the state. One dealer today may own 20 locations because of consolidation. Eventually, we may end up with one dealership for the entire state, essentially a company store. We see this already in the arena of construction equipment. This has had a detrimental effect on competition, particularly in the repair arena. OEMs have had record years making billions of dollars. Ask yourself, where does the money come from? Answer: the people who buy and pay for repairs on the equipment sold by these manufacturers. The opponents will say that this will enable owners to delete exhaust systems or chip engines. LB543 explicitly prohibits emissions tampering. If this is happening today, then the dealers need to turn in the people modifying exhaust systems to the EPA because they are breaking federal law. As for chipping, if an owner would chip an engine, it would void the warranty. Ask yourself, why would anybody do that? The answer is they would not, particularly when large ag engines cost in excess of $30,000 to replace. Exhaust and chipping issues have been going on for years. This is a smokescreen issue by the opponents. This bill has no bearing on these issues. USPIRG and Nebraska Farmers Union sent out a survey to owners on right to repair, and it overwhelmingly showed they were in favor of LB543. I have been told by a former mechanic that if the diagnostics are corrupted on a modern tractor or combine, that it would take 8 hours to upload a replacement operating system. Ask yourself what would happen if we had a cyber attack like what we saw in meatpacking last year. The FBI and Homeland Security are quite concerned about just that. If a nefarious group were to cyber assault our combines at harvest and force them into brick mode, the FBI estimated that 80% of the U.S. crop would go unharvested. This would endanger the food security of the United States. Putting the necessary repair tools in the hands of the owners will help alleviate this scenario. Consolidation of farms and dealerships in the state has been going on for decades. Currently, there are 46,332 farmers in Nebraska per the USDA Ag Statistics Service. As for dealerships, we know they have been consolidating down to the point where one dealer may have 15 or 20 locations. Today in Nebraska, there are 6 John Deere dealers. Farm.com lists 124 total dealer locations in the state. According to the 2017 Census of Agriculture, there are 119,938 tractors, 18,885 combines in the state. As a farmer, I appreciate that dealers still have a presence across the state, but with so few choices, it has reduced competition to the point that farmers are being hurt due to lack of competition.
1 minute.
The OEMs have a public relations problem that is easily solved, colleagues. It is time to swing for the fences and pass this bill. This bill has already been given a clean bill of health by an Attorney General's opinion. I urge you to vote green on LB 543 to protect the food security of Nebraska and the nation. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Brandt. As the clerk stated, there are amendments from the Judiciary Committee. Senator Lathrop, as chair of the committee, you are recognized to open on the committee amendments.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, good afternoon. LB 543, the Agriculture Right to Repair Act, was heard by the Judiciary Committee on February 25th of 2020. Committee Amendment AM 1800 was adopted on a 6-1 vote with one member present and not voting. The bill, as amended, advanced on a 5-2 vote. Committee Amendment AM 1800 is a white copy amendment that makes a few changes to LB 543 as it was introduced. Many of these changes affect the definitions contained in the bill. The amendment adds sprayers and removes drones and off-road vehicles from the definition of agriculture equipment. In the definition of documentation, language is added to include service that would bring the equipment back to full or upgraded functionality. AM 1800 adds updates to the definition of embedded software, as well as adding or other supplier to the definition of part. The amendment strikes software program from the definition of firmware. The amendment also strikes section 2 and 3 from subsections 2 and 3 from section 3 of the green copy of LB 543. These subsections would have required manufacturers to provide documentation and tools to disable the security locks and to provide, during the warranty period, parts, tools, and documentation necessary to repair the equipment if costing more than $100. Provisions regarding the immobilizer system are also removed. The amendment rewrites and adds language clarifying that repair does not include these modifications. I would urge your support of AM 1800 and a green copy vote on a committee amendment and AM 543. Just as an aside and as an observer in the Judiciary Committee, I'll offer this as well. We all see people that come in here and come to the legislature with their unique set of interests and their unique issues when they arrive. Senator Brandt has been a great committee member on the Judiciary Committee, and I've watched him since this bill was introduced. In my introduction, I said this was heard in February of 2020. Senator Brandt's been working on this issue almost nonstop since February of 2020 and probably well before that. I very much appreciate what he's done to try to reach an agreement and not have to bring this bill to the floor. And I would strongly encourage you to engage in this subject, to support AM 1800 and the underlying bill. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Lathrop. Debate is now open. Senator Brandt, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. You all should have a handout on your desk, two-pager from PIRG. This is the national group that represents right to repair. It shows the number of dealerships and what some of the concerns are. In talking with some of the colleagues this morning, they have a little bit of a difficult time wrapping their head around this, and it really should be right to digital repair should be the name of this. What you need to be aware of is the ag equipment industry is a very large industry. It's dominated by 4 or 5 companies, the largest of which manufactures over half the tractors and over half the combines. That one company does. But not all the companies address this the same way. I've got a handout here from AGCO that gives farmers digital repairs, doesn't give it to them, but it makes it, if you want to see this, they have a program where a farmer can go in and rent the equipment needed. A lot of farmers have reached out to me. Typically, it addresses maybe a very few of the original equipment manufacturers. I'm going to try and not call anybody out on this. You also received a handout on a World Herald editorial today by John Hanson. This is not just my issue. This is not a Nebraska issue. In 2022, the following states introduced bills on right to repair on ag equipment: Florida, Kansas, Michigan, Missouri, Nebraska, New York, Rhode Island, South Carolina, and Vermont. I guess I will mention John Deere here for a moment, just because it pertains to the right to repair aspect. There have been 11 class actions filed against Deere this year, all pertaining to right to repair, and I've got a list of those here if anybody wants to see them. I want to thank Senator Salama She asked the Attorney General for an opinion. I've got that here also if you'd like to see it. The end of the opinion says, and I highlighted in here, the Act, however, defines repair to exclude modifications, including changes affecting equipment or engine settings, and prohibits accessing any proprietary software code. These limitations on access and use of repair information would lessen any impairment of such agreements. What the Attorney General is saying is that the software code is not an issue. At the end, he goes on to say, even if a substantial impairment exists, the Act serves significant and legitimate public purposes, including 1, ensuring the ability of agriculture producers to repair their equipment in a timely manner, which facilitates the broader purpose of strengthening farms and businesses in rural communities, and 2, reducing monopolistic practices in the market for repair of agriculture machinery. Finally, the Act is a reasonable and appropriate means to serve these purposes. We therefore conclude that the Act likely does not violate the contract clause. So that's the highlight on that. A lot of people have asked me about data. We excluded data from this bill. Originally, it was included. A lot of people are not aware
1 minute.
that data is being continually collected and downloaded from these machines to who knows where. And if your landlord and your renter has modern farm equipment, that data is probably getting downloaded on your farm, maybe with your permission, maybe without your permission. But one thing's for pretty sure, you are not getting paid for the collection of how many acres are harvested or planted on your farm. And yet the person that owns that piece of equipment has to turn around and get software repairs from a dealer. We talked about that. And I guess the last point I would like to make is this. On the car and truck industry, you can go to an O'Reilly's, a Napa, a lot of different auto parts store and get repairs. In agriculture, you have to go to a dealership to get the repairs. No matter
Senator.
what. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Brandt. Senator Slama, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President, and good afternoon, colleagues. First and foremost, I'd like to thank Senator Brandt for his work with me on this issue, talking me through some of my concerns. It is wonderful to have a fellow rural senator on the Judiciary Committee, especially from Southeast Nebraska. That being said, I stand in respectful opposition to LB543, and it's because of the wide-reaching consequences this kind of legislation would have, not just in Nebraska and not just in the ag industry, but nationwide. I support the well-being and economic prosperity of farmers. Nebraska's economy is driven forward by the ag industry. The Nebraska Department of Agriculture reported that cash receipts from farm marketing contributed to more than $21 billion to Nebraska's economy in 2019. Nebraska's $5.8 billion in agricultural exports in 2019 translated to $1.28 in economic activities such as transportation, financing, warehouse, and production. So that's like 28% return, which is very high. 1 in 4 jobs in Nebraska are related to agriculture. Nebraska needs farmers, and it is the job of the legislature to protect them through meaningful and transparent legislation. So farmers and ranchers in Nebraska are not only the economic backbone of our state, but are also critical to the health and well-being of our nation as well as the world. According to the Nebraska Department of Agriculture, Nebraska is the #1 beef exporter to the European Union, Vietnam, Israel, Kuwait, and Colombia. The Yetter Institute reported that in 2018, Nebraska alone exported more than $1.44 billion of beef. Simply, America needs farmers. The world needs farmers. And our duty in the legislature is to represent and protect Nebraska's most important industry. LB543 is being marketed to benefit farmers by giving them the ability to repair their own machines. So it's no secret that the machines being used by farmers are invaluable to the industry and are critical to the statistics that I shared previously and the overall success of agriculture in Nebraska. However, the language and marketing of LB543 of just being the right to repair is kind of misleading. Farmers already have the right to repair. There's a stark contrast between the right to repair and the right to modify. The manufacturers of farming equipment, such as John Deere, have given farmers the tools needed to repair their equipment. The same manufacturers are being held to national standards by federal organizations and could be held liable if the modified machines no longer meet those national standards. There is a safety and reliability component that's a problem within this legislation too. The tractors being used by farmers are constantly changing, and manufacturers like John Deere are constantly innovating their products to give farmers the best chance at success and growth. Modern tractors are more than just a mom and pop 1960s, 1970s machine like my dad's 1972 Kubota. They are equipped with onboard computers, cell transmitters, CPS guidance systems, the whole thing. John Deere recently unveiled a fully autonomous tractor, meaning that a farmer can transport the tractor to a field, configure it for its operation, and just operate it on an app on their phone. So this software and work by manufacturers have helped increase productivity, but this has come at the cost of operational control. A farmer, unless he's equipped with some relatively high-level intensive training or education in terms of software coding, doesn't have what's needed to safely repair these machines and get into those systems.
1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. President. Trying to do so leaves their own personal safety at risk as well as the safety of their community. We've got a director of precision agricultural strategy and business development stating that one tweak to a modern tractor could cascade through an entire software system and lead to unintended consequences. Tractors weigh as much as 20 tons and run on 500 horsepower engines. Modifying these machines can be dangerous, and LB 543 does not take these dangers into consideration. All this to say, the conversation facilitated by LB 543 is a good one and a valuable one, and Senator Brandt is pointing out real issues within the industry. We're constantly working, whether you're on the farmer side of this issue or the manufacturer side, to ensure that both sides are happy, because we're all working towards the same goal, which is to grow agriculture in the state of Nebraska. So I'll be speaking.
Senator.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Slama. Senator Flood, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members, I want to thank Senator Brandt for bringing this bill. This is Nebraska on the front line of an issue that is a nationwide issue, if I'm correct. There are people probably in almost every rural state. There are farmers in America, and there are manufacturers in America that want to see where Nebraska goes. And it's best, I think, when the states lead the way. And here we're having a conversation about something that is meaningful and will guide the future on many levels. As I see this, there's the right to repair, there's intellectual property rights, there's safety, a lot of different angles. I'd like to ask Senator Brandt some questions, Mr. President.
Senator Brandt, will you yield?
Yes, I would.
Senator Brandt, can you speak to where this issue is? Are you dealing with the Federal Trade Commission on this, or what would be the governing agency on the federal side that's looking at this?
Ultimately, it would be the Federal Trade Commission. When we started this in 21, we were doing this as a state, and sometime in mid-21, there seemed to be some, I believe, congressmen, maybe your future colleagues, that have stepped up on this subject, and you started to hear a little bit about it at the federal level. There have been, I do have a complaint, I think, in my pile here, that some farm organizations have filed with the Federal Trade Commission on this subject.
So ideally, what would happen here is that the manufacturers would reach an agreement with the Federal Trade Commission and the complaining parties, in this case farmers. It was your understanding, I heard in your comments earlier, that there was a possibility for that to happen by January of 2021. Describe that process for us and explain what the best outcome would have been.
Absolutely. We initially brought this bill for Nebraska Farm Bureau. Historically, at their state convention, they had a vote of like 178 to 5 to do right to repair. They asked me to bring this bill, and I agreed. After it went through the committee hearing, the original equipment manufacturers asked us to hold off for a year from introducing, and we readily agreed in the hope that American Farm Bureau, working with their attorneys and and I cannot remember what the name of the overriding group for the OEMs is, could come up with a memorandum of understanding, or an MOU, like what we see in car and truck repair. And to date, that's kind of stalled out.
So if we were to pass LB543 as amended by the Judiciary Committee amendment, what would ripple through the United States in terms of the policy?
I think using the state that passed the car and truck right to repair, there's only been one state pass that, and we're all a beneficiary of it because the MOU affects all 50 states. I think you would see them come to the table, and it would be resolved.
And what year was that car and truck?
2012.
Okay, and that governs the electronic systems and all of the different IT systems in like a Buick or a Cadillac or different types of American-made vehicles, or all vehicles?
It's my understanding that it includes all vehicles that sign on, all companies that sign on to the MOU.
Okay, so help me understand the intellectual property rights issues. Are the OEMs basically saying, hey, we developed this software, it's proprietary, we are employing it in our implements that you purchase, and therefore one of the issues, like, hey, this is our intellectual property?
One minute.
Essentially, yeah, that would be a good way to explain it. With some companies, when you buy a $500,000 or $600,000 combine, you have what's sitting in front of you. They still control the software component, which I think most farmers are fine with. The problem becomes when it says fuel system or something that the onboard computer cannot handle, and then you have to go to the dealership to get the digital fix and have them come out to fix it. Not all companies and equipment are the same.
Now, this is something that we might have to talk again about, but does the farmer purchase a software license for the software, or does the farmer outright purchase the software that could only be repaired by the OEM? Is this a license that they purchase with a continuing obligation of like $200 a month or something? Or what are they actually purchasing?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I'll have to get back to you on an exact answer.
Time, Senators.
Okay.
Thank you, Senator Flood and Senator Brandt. Senator Lowe, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Senator Brandt, for bringing the bill and putting it before us today. The last bill before our Sunny Day party, so this is going to stretch on for a long time. It's going to feel that way anyway, I think. An evil joke to most of us still here on the floor. I'd like to read testimony from Trevor Meekum from Valmont Industries. Good morning, Chairman. My name is Trevor Meekum. I am Vice President of Global Technology and Industry Relations for Valmont Industries, representing Valley Irrigation. First off, thank you for the opportunity to be able to address my concerns regarding LB543. Agriculture Equipment Right to Repair Act. On behalf of Valmont Industries, then Valley Irrigation, and the state of Nebraska, I'd like to first off say thank you for all the public service. As you are aware, the agriculture industry is thriving, and it is a business that continues to be at the forefront, influencing many sectors of the economy, both locally and internationally. With the growing population, diminishing land available today to feed that population, it's important to understand the current development in the industry and how it will affect our production and distribution of food. So as a third-generation family farmer and a longtime industry professional, myself, my career over the past 22 years has spanned the continual changes and advancements in agriculture that we now benefit from today. This specifically, the advancement in agricultural technology has transformed many areas of farming, including irrigation. Whether the perspective of a farmer, a participating dealer, or original equipment manufacturer, I have the distinguished opportunity to be on each side of the table. As you may know, water is the foundation of many agricultural crops in the U.S. and worldwide. What you may not know is that it also consumes approximately 80% of all the water used in the United States. However, with many consumer technology trends, we have been able to leverage many benefits into our industry that conserve water and energy resources. This also includes automation of center pivots and remote access to turn them on, turn them off, control the flow of water, how much it is needed, how much is being used, and receive notifications and alerts as to a grower where there are issues regarding the machines and even the crop itself. They're the reason why we invest so much time and money into our dealer network, ensuring the proper training and certification is met to achieve the highest standards necessary for proper functionality. Amongst the thousands of connections growers have, enabling them to control a variety of devices remotely, there are safeguards in place to help assure the necessary water efficiency and power management. Make no mistake, we are advocates for the farmer, and we do advocate for the appropriate right to repair as needed, as I just did with our family farm, and looked to serve and save on operational costs year over year. Thank you, Mr. President. Still, there were inevitable certain things that were understood I cannot repair myself without creating more potential risk. As I stated earlier, the evolution of technology is continuous and innovation beyond just familiar sprinkler irrigation, and will soon include hardware applications and artificial intelligence, knowing where, when, and how much to spray for pest and disease. Naturally, such applications require a higher level of expertise to troubleshoot, giving uncertified access to independent third parties who have not gone through the proper certification and training could materially and negatively impact growers' attempt to produce greater yields year after year. From a consumer perspective, I'd like to say also Apple and Android application. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Lowe. Senator Friesen, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. So on this bill, I've dealt with this issue for several years along with Senator Brandt, and I appreciate him bringing it, and I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the issues that we run into in the ag industry. And I went to Southeast Community College in Milford. I'm a trained diesel technician, and for up until the last couple of years, I have had the ability to really fix almost anything on my tractor or combine that needs to be fixed. Once in a while, I do have to call my dealer and have it fixed, but as we've added technology, there are places where I don't even want to go. I do not understand how it works anymore. I have not had training, and so as far as me getting into the software of a machine, I would not want to go there because I don't know what I'm doing. So back in the day when I was first started farming and we were buying equipment, I was usually buying used equipment because that's all beginning farmers can do. That's all you can afford. And so with every piece of a machine that I bought or equipment, I bought the repair manual and a parts manual. And Deere sold it to me. I had that at home. I could use it, but what I didn't get was the updates that I guess the dealers have to pay a monthly fee to receive those updates. So I was not in possession of an updated repair manual. So if they had to do flash updates like they can now on computers, They're updated as they see things happening across the country. Dealers can get an updated repair manual that covers that situation. But my dealer has always treated me really well. But I think the big issue in this here is that when you buy a new piece of equipment, it's under warranty for however many years or hours of service. I don't expect to touch that machine. I will call my dealer because they're going to offer this service. I'm going to let them do it. But when that warranty runs out, do I own the machine or do I own a piece of iron that without software is worthless? And so if I can't touch the software or do anything with it, do I own a tractor? Do I own a pile of iron? Because these days, without the software, without the computers, without all of that modern technology put in there, that tractor would not run. I could not disconnect things. I could not just bypass wires. It functionally would not run. It wouldn't move. It wouldn't do its job. And so, yet the warranty has run out. And if I have to call my John Deere dealer to come work on that equipment because I cannot have access to that software, to that computer program that would look at the software to see if I have a problem. So, I mean, this is a very complicated issue going forward. So we're at a point in time where if we start to see autonomous vehicles, and you can talk about cars, whether it's a Tesla or a John Deere tractor that's fully autonomous. I think we're reaching that point where we're never going to have an independent repair dealer available for cars or trucks or tractors. Because at some point in time, if I work on, whether I'm an independent garage or an independent farmer, if I work on an autonomous vehicle or any kind of piece of that, if something happens, if somebody gets killed,
1 minute.
Who's liable? And I think that's where the whole big issue here lies, is so many things are tied into this with safety. And if your PTO shaft would suddenly start because of something you did in the software code and you are killed in a farm accident, who does your widow sue? Do they sue the dealer, the manufacturer, or is it because you worked on the tractor? Those are issues that we're going to have to talk about here and make people feel comfortable about. But again, it gets to that point where do you own your tractor or do you own a piece of iron? Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Friesen. Senator Dorn, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, colleagues, for the conversation this afternoon. I want to thank Senator Brandt for bringing this. Visited with him quite often in the last couple of years, him and other people and Farm Bureau and everybody that's been working on this bill and attempting to bring something about that there is an issue out there. There is an issue with something that, generally speaking, farmers who are, if a farmer could be his own mechanic, he's sometimes a real happy person. And there are many farmers that are tremendous mechanics, probably better than some of them in the dealership, and yet they've decided to farm and go that route. So the issue of repairing or having that ability to do that is not the same for every farmer or everybody out there, but the comments here today, I think, are very interesting to me. I agree some with Senator Friesen here about the fact that this is not just a simple issue. I compare it to some of the technology issues that we have in our society today. If you look at 20, 30 years ago, our cell phones was a bag phone, and now look at what our cell phone does and everything. And when you have issues, a cell phone, generally speaking, they're at the price where you go get a new cell phone, but a tractor or a combine out there, we used to think a tractor that was $20,000 or $30,000 was an expensive tractor. And now we just had a neighbor that bought a tractor, was a $500,000 tractor. And that's he's going to use to plant this year. So when that tractor has an issue, what happens? Who takes care of that issue, and how long will he be down? Because when we're in the middle of planting season and that tractor goes down, and now we are basically under the auspice of the dealer of being the only one to repair that and not some farmer or some, I call it independent mechanic, coming and helping. Sometimes those hours are a lot of money out there in the field or whatever. A little example, last year we had another neighbor that bought a new tractor, bought a new planter, and he went out to the field to plant, got along fine for several days. Fourth, fifth day he went out there, and the tractor, and you have to understand this, on the tractor, on the monitor, on the planter monitor now, it shows which way the tractor's going, which way the planter's going, and all the rows are planting and what seed population and everything. His tractor was backwards, so it wouldn't move, because his tractor on the monitor was backwards. It took 2.5 days of the dealership and that farmer to work that out so he could get going again. We talk about all of Senator Schlama talked about all of the importance of agriculture in this state and all of the crops that we raise and everything. But when we start having issues like that, where now the farmer or a mechanic from the shop isn't able to, I call it, have the information from that company to correct those issues in a timely manner to the farmer or to that crop planting at a different time is very, very important. This is something that has evolved over time. John Deere is going to have an autonomous tractor out. They will have several of them out in Nebraska this year. I talked to a co-op in western Nebraska that has 2 autonomous sprayers. That's how they're going out and spraying the fields, with 2 autonomous tractors. Sprayers. So this is something that I call it won't become less of an issue. This will become more of an issue. And how does it go about to get solved? Appreciate Senator Brandt very much talking about the fact that on the national scale, the American Farm Bureau and many of these are talking. They haven't come to an agreement, yet the car industry could come to an agreement. So I think they'll keep working on it, but I think this is also something we need to be very much aware of as we go forward, and the importance of this to the state of Nebraska. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Dorn. Senator Pansing Brooks, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. So this bill is emblematic of the beauty of this legislature, because when I first got here 8 years ago, I was voting against the right to repair. And then I had a lot of long nights in the legislature with our whole committee, and got to talk to Senator Brandt once in a while about the right to repair. And he really gave me a lot of arguments, and I have switched my opinion, and I do now support the right to repair. I understand it better. I feel fortunate to have had this time with Senator Brandt. A couple things, I'm going to read something to you, but I also want to ask Senator Lathrop a couple questions.
Senator Lathrop, will you yield?
Yes, I will.
Thank you, Senator Lathrop. So we just heard some information about people being confused about who would be sued. If a farmer fixes his own equipment, then and then is killed, who is the widow to sue? And that's not an understanding of causation and negligence. So could you explain that a little bit, please?
Sure. So if you were to repair, or if a repair is done on a tractor, we'll say, and the farmer's then driving the tractor down the road, and something about the repair causes the tractor to swerve into the other lane, I'm just making up an example, and hit a semi head on. If the repair was done negligently, and the negligent repair is what caused the accident, then the person that did the repair. But it's not just you sued John Deere just because you happen to be riding a John Deere tractor when it did something. If there's a manufacturing defect, then John Deere's on the line. But if it is a negligent repair, it's the person that did the repair, whether that's the farmer. Of course, the widow isn't suing the estate of her husband. If it's the farmer, the third party, or the equipment dealer.
Perfect. Thank you, Senator Lathrop. And as a trial lawyer, I just thought he could clarify that more easily than even I. So I wanted to read to you, thank you for your time, Senator Lathrop. I wanted to read to you the article that was handed out to us, The Midlands Voices for Farmers' Sake, Pass the Right to Repair. And it's written by John Hanson on April 7, 2022. If and when your car, pickup, or truck breaks down, you have repair options. You can fix it yourself, have your independent repair shop fix it, or take it into the dealership. As owners, we decide which option works best for us. Thanks to automotive right to repair laws, manufacturers are required to provide necessary repair materials to consumers and independent mechanics. That creates the compensation in the repair market we all benefit from. Because farmers don't have right to repair for farm equipment when their tractors, combines, windjars, or silage cutters break down, farmers are at the mercy of the dealership. Farm equipment manufacturers use the very same software farmers paid for to lock farmers out of the ability to fix their own equipment or to take it to an independent repair shop. Farm manufacturers force farmers to depend on their dealerships at their prices and their schedules. Since there's no competition, the cost of farm equipment repairs is high and the quality of the service is often low and slow. That's an opinion. When farmers get together, they share stories about how much simple sensor repairs cost and how long it took for the dealer technician to arrive. During spring planting, summer haying, or fall harvesting, lost time amounts to a lot of lost money. After all, it was the sensitivity to limited time that drove farmers and ranchers to buy newer and bigger software-enabled equipment for hundreds of thousands of dollars in the first place. I'm going to jump down to another paragraph. Federal Trade Commission investigators asked for hard data from both equipment manufacturers and right to repair proponents to get to the bottom of these concerns. Their report found, quote, scant evidence to support manufacturers' justifications for repair restrictions, end quote. Instead, the FTC found that, quote, the specific changes that repair advocates seek to address manufacturer repair restrictions like access to information, manuals, spare parts, and tools were well supported by comments submitted for the record and testimony provided, end quote. These are the same kinds of arguments that Senator Brandt has given to me over the years to help me understand and change my position on right to repair, and I wholeheartedly support LB543 and the underlying amendment. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Pansing Brooks. Senator Brandt, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. As a farmer, I just want the damn thing to work. You laugh, but that's the truth. And I mean, that might explain some of my personality here. I don't care about the source code. So essentially what we're talking about with modern farm equipment is this thing here. If this is what it takes to make the tractor go or the combine go, fine. I probably won't be buying one of these things. But we historically in Nebraska, the mechanics that work in our ag dealerships, a good mechanic to a farmer is worth more than a doctor. And it is. And a lot of those guys will work there. It's sort of a starter job, 5 years, 10 years. Dad gets to be my age, is thinking about retiring. He'll go work with Dad for a while, and he'll fix stuff in the shop. And a lot of the neighbors know and like him as a mechanic, and they'll take stuff over to him, and all those parts still get bought from the local dealership. In fact, I've had dealers tell me they kind of rely on these guys during harvest and planting because there are not enough technicians in the state to service us in the heat of the battle. So it's not like everybody's going to run out and spend however many thousands of dollars to buy an agreement to have this thing, but it sure would be nice if that third-party mechanic out there could do this. I think you see a symptom of this when you watch online auctions. In agriculture, in the last 10 years, we buy and sell everything online. Tractors that are 15 years old, 10 years old, are bringing as much as they did new. And a lot of that is because they are pre-DEF, and DEF is the diesel exhaust fluid system. And that's kind of a problem for a lot of people. And we can fix them. They don't have a lot of electronic components on it. And if you don't believe me, go to Big Iron or Auction Time or some of these sites and just look at the history of what this stuff is bringing. It's kind of ironic if you know history. For those of you that don't know, I graduated UNL. I'm a double major, Ag Econ and Mech Ag. I'm sort of a techie back then, 1982, on the ag side. I wanted to work for a tractor manufacturer, but those of you around in the 80s understood that the ag economy collapsed and International went bankrupt, Allis-Chalmers went bankrupt, companies folded. But Mech Ag is part of ag engineering. Ag engineering in Nebraska runs the tractor test lab. And I know that dealers don't like the Nebraska tractor test lab because you have to have a Nebraska tractor test to sell a tractor in Nebraska. That came about 102 years ago in this building because a state representative bought a Ford tractor and it was Ford in name only, and this machine was so awful that a state senator he worked with the next year, Crozer, passed this law in 1919 mandating that Nebraska have all tractors tested that are sold here in the state. And that's still in force today. And that's sort of similar to what we're talking about is the cutting edge of technology.
1 minute.
Thank you. So with that, I see Senator Slama is back. She was saying this would have wide-reaching consequences nationwide. We hope so. We really hope that if Nebraska passes this, that it will bring the OEMs to the table to sign a memorandum of understanding for the entire country. And that's really what the end goal is here, folks. So this is not about the right to modify. That's already happening. The bill's not here. If you're complaining about the exhaust system and chipping, do something about it. That's not what this bill is about. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Brandt. Senator Bosselman, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I think Senator Dorn and Senator Friesen said it best. This is a complicated issue that's not going to be solved very easily, I don't think. A lot of issues have come up already, and I think things need to be talked about some more. I think Senator Friesen, well, Senator Dorn mentioned autonomous vehicles coming up. That's a serious issue, I think, especially as we begin talking about computer components, command modules, whatever it might be within those motherboards and those type of things, and how we interact with that. You know, one thing that was mentioned here earlier, and I appreciate what Senator Lathrop said. I think one of the challenges with this is that if this now becomes part of the equation we're talking about, and the farmer, the hired man, hired woman has one of these and does some work on a piece of equipment, and they do follow technical guidance, and they do make changes to fix whatever it is on that, then they go out and have an accident, then who's going to be responsible for it? I think there's a whole lot of things here that need to be considered, and I think it's something we really got to think about, be careful about. And the MOU at the national level, I know we've talked about this for several years since I've been here. I think every year I've been here we've been talking about this and the need for it. I'm not saying that there does not need to be an agreement there where I think local shops, local people can already do a lot of this, but not all of it. But especially when it comes to safety issues is where the dividing line is right now, perhaps. And that's a concern for me on this, is that this isn't your old farm all anymore. It's not something you're going to tear apart and put back together on your own. There is a lot of technology that's built into this equipment today. And yes, and I agree with Senator Brandt, there's occasions out there where you may be down for some time because you can't get a technician out there, a person out there to get it done. I had a similar incident when I first, several years ago with one of my tractors. We had an electrical issue. And I had to have somebody come out, and it took us a long time to track that thing down and get it fixed. It's not something that can be done easily sometimes, and sometimes it does take time. I don't know that this will necessarily fix all those problems. I was at a neighbor's place here just the other day, a couple weeks ago, and he had just bought a new grain trailer, and the canvas across the top. If you don't know, those automatically roll back and forth. You can do those. Well, the problem was it would open but wouldn't close. So then they had the technician come out. Technician looked at it. Couldn't figure it out. So then they took it back to manufacturer. They worked on it. Couldn't figure it out. Well, part of it they thought was climatic. Weather, cold weather, warm weather, whatever it is. So there's issues that deal with, especially when we start talking about computers, electronics, and other things with this equipment, that I think needs to be carefully considered, because when we start having individuals, when myself or someone else starts working on a piece of equipment, a tractor, a baler, combine, whatever it might be, and you really don't have all that technical skill and that knowledge behind it, I think it's a challenge for us to automatically just say everybody can do it, because everybody doesn't have that skill. Everybody doesn't have that knowledge. Everybody doesn't have that technology nor the ability to do that. And I think what's happening now across the country, I think in the state, is that there is a certain amount of technology, ability for you to go out and repair or work on those vehicles. It's that last bit of information, that last bit of technology now that we're talking about, that is being worked on at the federal level. And that's one thing when we talk about broadband and mapping. What am I told? Well, the FCC is doing it, so we need to wait till they get it done, because when they do it, it's going to trump whatever we do anyway. Not saying that's necessarily the right thing to do or the best thing to do. In fact, I would rather I'd rather do the mapping myself and not have them do it. But I do believe in this case there is some significant things. So I'm listening to the conversations that are going on. I'm talking to different people here or that's in the rotunda about this. I do think that this is something that's going to take time to look at. I think it's something that we need to have the conversation on. Will this move the needle at the national level? I don't know if that really will.
Time, Senator.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Bostman. Senator Flood, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President, members, friends all. It is this bill, LB543, is very interesting, and Senator Brandt and I were having a good conversation. One of the issues that I want to delve into a little bit is property rights. That's why I was asking the question about whether the purchaser of one of these tractors, for instance, actually has a license to the software, or if they outright own the software. And I'm going to ask Senator Brandt a question in a moment, but I want to just explain my experience with software. So probably in the late 80s, I think it was Ray Lockhart. He is the owner of KOGA Radio in Ogallala, Nebraska. He and his son developed a special software that allowed radio stations to play the music digitally without putting it on records or carts or whatever, reel-to-reel machines. And I was working at a radio station in Norfolk, one of the first in the nation, that bought the software. And at that time, it was a beginning company. Ogallala was the head, the pinpoint for the entire nation, and his business took off. And when we would have a sound card go down or a malfunction with the computer, there would be midnight runs to Ogallala from all over the country to go to Keith County and get the software, because there was only one place to get it fixed, and that was the manufacturer, because Ray had built the software and it was his intellectual property. Fast forward 30 years, and when that happens today, and by the way, that company that he started is worldwide now. purchased by iHeartMedia, used almost in every radio station in the world. And now within a few seconds, a technician, used to be in Oglala, now you don't know where they're from, remotes into your computer system, fixes your problem, and we pay a support fee of X amount of money a month. And the reason I raise this whole question is this where right to repair is going? Is it going to where you hook your tractor or it hooks automatically, data is sent over the internet, and the manufacturer gets into the middle of your motherboard and determines where it's going? And if so, will this render itself moot? As I understand it, it's more complicated than that. Senator Brandt, would you answer a question?
Senator Brandt, will you yield?
Yes, I would.
So you understand what I'm saying, where John Deere, for instance, could remote into someone's combine or their tractor. Respond to that for me so I could kind of appreciate what your view is on that.
You're about 5 years too late. That already happens.
Okay.
But you need wireless to do that, and I think you and I and Senator Wayne and Senator Balsman have had a lot of conversations about broadband and fiber in the state of Nebraska.
That's a very good point. Here we are back to broadband. But okay, so if you can remote in and that diagnostic work can be done remotely, where does the right to repair come in if you have no barrier back to the manufacturer? And I'm not saying there isn't a need for it, but if they can diagnose what the issue is remotely, then I think we're talking about a computer chip or a part here that's connected to the information technology system, the IT system
1 minute.
of the tractor.
So my understanding is that's kind of what happens today with some manufacturers, is you can call the dealership, they've already downloaded or looked at what's wrong with your machine, and they're working with you on the phone to figure out, telling you to go in and do this or check this, or maybe it's a fault that you need a part for, and they're saying, come to the dealership, we'll have the part for you. So
Okay.
what you're saying is happening today, it's just not happening across the board.
So in a way, you don't need more. You don't necessarily. You just want it fixed. You don't necessarily need more repair shops. You need more technicians, regardless of who they work for, to come out and deal with the motherboard of the IT system.
Both.
Okay.
You need more third-party technicians, and you need more dealership
Time,
technicians.
Senators.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Flood and Senator Brandt. Senator John Kavanaugh, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Well, thank you, Senator Brandt and Judiciary Committee for bringing this bill. I always appreciate Senator Brandt usually starts his comments in some fashion like that. I rise in support of AM 1800 and LB 543, and you know, like Senator Pansing Brooks, I wasn't really and didn't know about the right to repair issue when I first got here and ran for legislature, and I serve on the Agriculture Committee with Senator Brandt, and he's educated me on a number of issues, as have other people in this body, about important issues in agriculture. And one of the things I've learned about is efficiency, that farmers are working to make sure that they can get as much done as they can in the limited window that they have, weather-wise and timing-wise. And so what Senator Brandt talked about earlier is getting somebody out there to actually be able to fix it quickly, because you might only have a day where you can be harvesting, and nobody needs me to tell you this, but it just seems to me logical that time is of the essence when it comes to all stages of agricultural production. So I think this bill is important to help farmers do the work they need to when they need to do it, and not have a hurdle to actually getting things repaired. But I've been listening to the debate and learning, and I just had a question if Senator Brandt would yield to a question.
Senator Brandt, will you yield?
Yes, I will.
So thank you, Senator Brandt. So I've been listening, and there's some vocabulary that I just wasn't familiar with. So you talked about chip in, is that the word?
Yep.
And could you explain what that is?
Let me give you a little history. On some of the older equipment, like when I was growing up, You needed more horsepower. You turn the screw on the Rosemaster injection pump, and you got an old Alice, you can get another 20, 30 horse out of it. Okay, so what we've got now is we have, just like your automobiles, computer-controlled equipment. And the only way you can get more horsepower out of that equipment is you have to put a different chip in it, okay? But unlike the old equipment that could take maybe an increase in horsepower, the specifications on the new equipment are so finite that if you have a 150 horse tractor and you're going to jack that thing to 200 or 250 horse, quite often the transmission and axles can't take that. So what happens is it's called chipping. So basically, for lack of a better description, there's sort of a gray market out there that'll come out and switch chips in your machine to give you more horsepower.
So people are already doing that?
Yes.
And would this bill make that legal?
This bill would have really no bearing on that.
Oh.
If it's happening today, it's a problem for our dealers in Nebraska, and here's the problem. Somebody chips a machine, they trade it in, it's going to wear out prematurely because it's over horsepowered, okay? And then you're going to come in and buy this machine, and that dealer is on the hook because nobody told them that was chipped. And that is something that probably needs to be addressed somewhere down the road. I think a lot of farmers are honest enough to tell them that, yeah, in fact, I bought a chipped combine, and it was unchipped before I traded in. It works just fine. I've got no issues with that. It was checked out by my dealer. I'm fine with it. But it can cause a lot of mechanical problems.
Okay. So, well, see, I learned something just now. I didn't know anything about that topic. I appreciate that answer, Senator Brandt. So, and just to be clear that I understand what you said there, this chipping thing is something that is going on.
1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. President. Is already happening. This bill does not make it easier to do or harder to do, or doesn't really address it in any way.
That's not how I see this bill. No, it would give you access to the digital repair tools that you need to make your equipment go back to the original or the manufacturer's specifications.
Okay. Thank you, Senator Brandt. I would yield you the remainder of my time if you want it.
Thank you, Senator. To Senator Brandt.
To Senator Brandt, yes.
25 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. President. That's it.
Thank you, Senator Kavanaugh and Senator Brandt. Senator Greger, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Well, I've came in about the same time that Senator Brandt came in, and I've been pretty much riding this train with him on this right to repair. But as I see it, and I visit with different people on both sides of the coin here, it all comes down to the software. And I'd just like to ask Senator Brandt a few questions, clarify for myself, and maybe hopefully clear something up.
Senator Brandt, will you yield?
Yes, I will.
Senator Brandt, is there currently software available for producers and independent dealers to have to fix tractors?
It depends on the machine and the company. It's all over the board. Some companies provide it easily. Other companies, the only way you can access it is through a dealer. It's really varied right now.
Okay, thank you. And what I'm hearing from the very start, the two major concerns of being able to purchase this software and why they don't want you to purchase the software or have full control. The two concerns are jacking with the exhaust and or horsepower, is that correct?
Yes.
So if I bought that implement and I used that software and I did do something like that, could somebody track that I've been into that exhaust and or powered horsepower with computer technology?
Here again, it depends how new the equipment is. If you bought a brand new piece of equipment today, I'm pretty sure they know everything that happens on that piece of equipment. It's downloaded constantly, maybe not on an older piece of equipment.
So I buy a new piece of equipment, I have a warranty on it, and if I did something like that, would this bill make that warranty no longer valid?
This bill doesn't affect the warranties. If you do that, you're in most cases, you're going to be in violation of your warranty. If you would either chip the machine during the warranty period, I'm pretty sure the warranty would be void. And it already is a federal violation to mess with the exhaust systems.
So I go back to, and possibly once again, if they're able to track this and they know that you've been into those two areas and it's federal law, couldn't that be something like we have on, if you wreck your car, there's a salvage title on that's, you know, you can only buy that car with the new owner knowing that this piece of implement has been messed with in those two areas?
That's an interesting concept. I suppose that could happen, except we don't have titles on farm equipment.
Yeah. Well, yeah, like you say, with the technology, things like that could be happening, which would lower the value or make that piece of equipment worthless if somebody got into something like that too, you know.
I guess I'd sort of like to flip a question back to a former helicopter mechanic and pilot.
Pilot, not mechanic.
Did you guys have technology when you fixed helicopters?
Well, I was the pilot and I don't know how to fix a helicopter. I just know how to break it. Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, Senator Greger. Senator Brandt. Senator Lowe, you're recognized.
Thank you again, Mr. President. I just want the damn thing to work. I believe those were your words, right? Senator Brandt, I want my cars to be that way too. My first vehicle was a 1950 Buick, and it was beautiful. It was a boat. It was huge. Had a chrome grille that went down over the top of the bumper. It was beautiful. I was 14 years old when I bought that car with a buddy of mine who was also 14 years old, and we tore it apart and we made it run. We could do that. Senator Brandt, I think if you'd take a Alice Chalmers 5050 or a John Deere 4040, that you could probably do the same thing and the dealers wouldn't have a problem. And you could make that damn thing work. But we're talking about new machinery. Computers on wheels. Scott Raber for Titan Machinery had this testimony. Good morning, Chairman Lathrop and the committee. Thank you for this time. My name is Scott Raber. I'm with Titan. Thank you for this time this morning. We're a Case IH New Holland case construction dealer representing 16 dealerships across the state. They employ 400 individuals in various small towns across the state. First of all, I guess I'd like to thank the farmers in the room. I myself grew up milking 400 dairy cows every morning. Senator Merman, I think you may have some friends there. For many of my years of life. So I appreciate what you do. From our dealership's perspective, it was our goal. And I think of any dealer's mission to be partners with our customers to make their lives easier, not harder. Their success and their satisfaction is critical to our success and our satisfaction. Our success. I have handed out the service tool that is available from Case IH or New Holland, and that is very recently available for consumers to purchase, whether that be a farmer or an independent repair shop. I listened to all this testimony this morning and I'm somewhat confused. It seems like there's confusion in the marketplace on what is available, what is not available, what a customer does have the ability to do, what a customer does not have the ability to do. And what I say directly to your earlier questions, Chairman Lathrop, I believe there's a poor breakdown in communication on what one dealership offers, that C&H offers and has available in the marketplace. If you do look under the electronic diagnostic tool portion of, that I handed out, I think it addresses a lot of the concerns and really consternation that many customers have experienced over time. As equipment has evolved, we've all had to learn. I guess we are spending a lot of time talking about equipment that's 10 and 15 years old. I can say from our perspective, technology is advancing very quickly. New equipment is not clearly always the answer, but there is a vast and quickly evolving technology that's happening now, and we have the ability, or our customers have the ability, of new machines to repair or see what's happening to them remotely, whether it be from a dealership seat or whether it be from a grower's seat.
1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. President. I guess in closing, it's our opinion and our hope that we are able to resolve this without further legislation and really address it as market-based solution. Thank you, and I welcome any questions at that time. And I seem to recall at one time that Rolls-Royce, if you did any repairs yourself on that car, it voided their warranty. So as the equipment goes up in price, we have to think about that warranty and what it will do if we decide to repair it ourselves or with a third party. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Lowe. Senator Friesen, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. So earlier I was talking about what could happen down the road when you have software that you don't own and you have a piece of equipment that depends on it. And I don't know that we can ever go back to where we could get to when the automotive industry made this switch. But at some point in time, the dealerships and the manufacturers are going to have to realize that third-party repair shops are a good thing, and I think they enhance your brand. But when you look at what's available today, and again, I have not gone out and tried to purchase the laptop and the software and the technical manuals anymore because I feel that I'm outdated in my training. But when you purchase a $450,000 tractor these days, and when it's out of warranty, or 10 years from now, 15 years from now, if one of the onboard computers fails and Deere says, well, we no longer make it, we didn't sell very many of them, so, your tractor's obsolete. We don't have that anymore. Do we have the ability to get the third-party market interested in manufacturing those components that Deere maybe thinks isn't profitable anymore? Or Case IH, I don't want to just pick on one brand. I'm just saying that one of the manufacturers determines that after 10 or 12, 13 years, they're not selling enough of them, we just quit handling that, and suddenly one of those computers goes down. Do we have, like in the automotive industry, I think we have third-party manufacturers that make aftermarket parts. You have choices. We don't have those choices in farm equipment manufacturing. And so that's what troubles me a little bit, and I don't know if this bill gets there or it doesn't. But somewhere there's got to be this middle ground to where we can reach this agreement, and I was hoping that they would have this MOU done by the time we would get to this bill, but it seems like everybody wants to drag their feet and stretch this out. And it is more of a national issue than it is state, but this would push the manufacturers to do something. But down the road, we're going to either have to have what we call maybe a third-party market where someone else can come in, but that would require John Deere to share their source code. And I think, there are companies that have sold some software upgrades where you can up your horsepower. And I have a feeling that there are companies that have probably acquired that source code and been able to manipulate it and do this already. But wouldn't it be, I guess, the question is, should there be an active third-party market to where you have choices to go? Would it be nice to be able to go to an auto parts store and purchase this computer that runs your tractor versus having to go to a dealership? You could say the same about your car. There are third-party manufacturers that make a lot of car parts. Now, as we get into the Tesla, I think down the road, Tesla, and there is no third-party repair shops are ever going to touch a Tesla. There are liability issues there. And that's the way it's going to happen with equipment down the road as they are more autonomous. No one third party is going to ever work on those vehicles. This is a
1 minute.
extremely complicated subject, but I think it boils down to the fact that if there were third-party manufacturers that could have access to this source code, when vehicles get 10, 12, 15 years old and all of a sudden the original equipment manufacturer decides not to make those parts anymore, instead of having a tractor that I can use, I have a boat anchor. I have a pile of junk. And unless at some point Deere wants to actively push this idea that there could be a third-party manufacturer that does this, we are going to run into this issue more and more as we go forward. And I wish Deere would address it, or the manufacturers would address this issue sooner rather than later. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Friesen. Senator Slama, you're recognized.
Thank you, Ms. President. Sorry, I would have walked a bit more quickly, but I've got coffee here and a white dress, so didn't want to mess that up. Once again, I'd like to thank Senator Brandt for his efforts on this issue. And as you're listening to debate, I mean, I think it really becomes clear that even the senators that are in opposition to this, we're not that far apart from Senator Brandt in the essence of, I just want the damn thing to work. I mean, you talk to anybody who has owned any kind of machinery, whether they're a farmer or not, at the end of the day, that's what you want. That's what the end goal is. I just disagree with the means of how we're getting there. I worry that LB543 it goes beyond just a basic right to repair, and it turns into a mandate that could really compromise manufacturer, dealer safety. It raises all sorts of questions about liability that have already been raised, as in when this tractor that's been modified goes into the dealer for repair, who's liable when a part blows up in their face? And that's a real question. I mean, that's something that's been an issue within the cell phone industry for years. And as tractors start getting that level of technology, you're raising those sorts of safety issues. So I just disagree with the approach here, and I think there's a really good reason why an agricultural right to repair bill hasn't advanced from committee out anywhere in the United States besides Nebraska. And that's because at the end of the day, Senator Brandt and I are totally on the same page with our end goal. It's that we want a federal memorandum of understanding in place like the auto manufacturers did in 2012 or 2011, whichever year it was. I just disagree with the route of going on the state legislation side, doing something that is unprecedented and opens a lot of doors for liability, not just in the ag industry, but also opens doors for other areas of tech, like cell phones, like computers. And I think my concerns are pretty well reflected in some testimony. A similar, almost identical bill actually was introduced in Missouri. It's called HB 975. And Aaron Porter, who's a farmer from Missouri, testified before their House about HB 975. And it gets to some of the safety concerns, some of the gaps in this kind of legislation and this kind of approach. So at the end of the day, Senator Brandt and I are on the exact same page. I want a federal memorandum of understanding. We all just want the dang thing to work. If you're sitting in the field waiting for your dealer, your manufacturer for hours on end to come out and do a repair on a piece of equipment that's not working because you threw a code and it's a fuel line code and you know that you can replace a fuel line code on your own. Like 6 hours can cost you thousands of dollars. I see that issue. Coming from a rural district, absolutely, I wrap my head around that issue all the way. I just think that a large mandate that raises a lot of questions when it comes to liability. And even though the Attorney General generally disagrees on a violation of Article 1, Section 16, and impairment of previous contracts, which you can't do. Thank you, Mr. President. Under the Nebraska state constitution, I do think there are constitutionality questions that are open here. Since I'm running out of time here, I'll get to Aaron Porter's testimony on my next turn on the mic, and that really gets into more of the substance of the issues within these right to repair bills, their language. But again, at the end of the day, I see the issue, I respect the issue, and Senator Brandt and I, and even the opponents of the bill, we all see the issue. We just take different approaches in how we want to get to that federal memorandum of understanding. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Slama. Senator Williams, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President, and good afternoon or good evening. Just wanted to take a few minutes. This is an issue that has been around for a long time. As many of you know, I was on the Judiciary Committee my first 2 years in the body, and in 2015 was the first time I had heard about this when a bill came to our committee at that time. And as I recognize the bill now, there are fairly substantial changes in the bill that Senator Brandt has brought forward. The bill that we had back in 2015 covered a lot more than farm equipment, and that was one of the real hang-ups of it. It covered things like the intellectual property with your cell phone, other things that were like that, so we had a lot of concerns about it. And there was an attempt at that time to talk about and look for a national solution. And I think that's what Senator Brandt talked about at the beginning of his introduction today. And with that, I've got a couple of questions I would like to ask Senator Brandt if he would yield.
Senator Brandt, will you yield?
Yes, I would.
Thank you, Senator Brandt, and appreciate your work on this issue, because it is extremely important that we find solutions to these kind of things for our state's #1 industry, agriculture. When you were talking about a potential national solution or a memorandum of understanding, tell me again what is the status of that as we sit here in 2022?
Well, I'll give you just a little cursory view of what I know. Nebraska Farm Bureau is a leader on this subject matter, and they went to their national, which is the American Farm Bureau, and asked them to work on this, and they agreed. They hired a law firm that specializes in this to do the work. It went through their process, which was the process at Farm Bureaus to be vetted by all the states, or at least a council of state presidents, one of which is Nebraska's. And once it went through that process, then they approached the OEMs. And at this point, I know no more on where we're at in that relationship.
I'm assuming that you would agree that a national solution would be something that would help all of the industry, the ag industry, the implement industry, and the manufacturing industry. I think would all benefit from that. Several of the, and you talked about how the consolidation of dealerships has happened, and being a banker, I understand consolidation. When I started in banking in Nebraska, there were 455 banks in the state of Nebraska. Now we're down to 155, give or take. But there are still as many banking locations as there used to be. They're just owned by people. Several of the dealerships well, two in particular that I deal with that have green color are on the state borders. And what situation would they have if we were to pass this law and they're doing business with customers in Nebraska and customers in Kansas. Is there a problem with that kind of a situation?
This is pretty simple. You would bring a civil action it would go to the AG's office, and the AG would rule on it. So I doubt anybody from Kansas would have standing. So I think it would be just limited to
1 minute.
Producers in Nebraska.
So a dealership wouldn't have to gear up and act differently with Nebraska customers than they would their Kansas-based customers?
I don't believe so. I'd have to find out and get back to you.
Okay. And I know we're running out of time. The other questions that I have, if I'm back on the mic, I wanted to talk a little bit about the issues with emissions, safety equipment, and voiding or not voiding warranties and how that would all work under this bill. But we can do that again at another time. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Williams. Senator Brandt. Senator Erdman, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. So, different than 35 other people, I've been here all the time, listening. And this is peculiar, Senator Brandt, very similar to the day I had my epic consumption tax up. There's nobody in the room. So for those of you back home, it's like a weekend here. And that's disheartening, because there's information to be shared here that needs to be heard by people. And I understand that. But I have a few questions for Senator Brandt, if he would yield.
Senator Brandt, will you yield?
Yes, I would.
Okay, Senator Brandt, so let's say today we pass this and this becomes law. Does this force those implement dealers, those manufacturers, to give us the codes and the things that we want?
No.
So tell me what happens.
It gets back to the one-liner. The one-liner is it would allow owners and third-party mechanics the ability to restore equipment to manufacturer's specifications. And I know that's vague. It would be impossible to write a bill that encompasses all the possible scenarios with all the codes and all the computers and all the what-ifs out there. And we chose to keep it simple for that reason.
Okay, so then this passes, and then the local mechanic would be able to get the proprietary information they need to make the repairs. Would that be correct?
They would be able to purchase that, yes. The bill, as it was originally written, and we took the language out that said that the dealer had to provide that.
Okay.
And it kind of read free of charge, but no, so we removed all that language.
Okay, so what happens if they don't? We pass this statute and they say, that's proprietary information, we have a patent on this, we don't have to share this with you, then where do we go from there?
You would file an action with the state attorney general.
Okay, so if we're the only state that does this, is that a problem for us?
Part of our motivation for doing it this way was what happened in the car and truck industry, where one state did this, and what really strikes a fear of God into a manufacturer is not the first state, but the second state. Because now let's say Missouri and Nebraska both passed a law, and they're a little bit different. Now that original equipment manufacturer has to do two different things, and then the more states, every state law is going to be a little bit different. So it's to their benefit to have a national memorandum of understanding.
So I think earlier in your comments you made a explanation of the tractor testing lab we have here, correct? And is that right?
Yeah.
And so if I'm a manufacturer and I want to sell a tractor in Nebraska, does it have to go to that testing lab first?
Well, historically it did, and I may be incorrect here, but I think it had to be like over 100 horse. There was a horsepower limit in Nebraska. If it was below that, you could use the manufacturer's stated test, but the Nebraska test would verify what the manufacturer was saying.
Okay, so could the manufacturer say, because of the stipulations in Nebraska, I'm not going to sell any equipment in Nebraska? Could they do that?
Not only could they do that, they have done that. farmed with Alice Chalmers for years, and there are certain models and transmissions that were not sold in Nebraska because they didn't manufacture enough and they didn't feel it was worth the cost of the test.
1 minute.
Okay. So if that happened here, we may find a manufacturer not even sell equipment to us. Would that be fair?
That would be a stretch. Nebraska has a very large ag economy that if somebody's unwilling to sell something here, trust me, somebody else will step in and sell it.
Okay. Thank you for answering my questions. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Senator Erdman. Senator Brandt. Senator Bosselman, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. There's been a couple things talked about here tonight that I think we need a little more explanation, and I did ask some of the manufacturers about it specifically. And we're talking about EPA controls, and why not give them, if you give them the codes, then, why can't you fix it? And then if something's wrong on the emissions, well, then that's on you. Well, that's not how the EPA sees it, is how it's being explained to me, is the EPA holds the manufacturer responsible for those emissions. So even if I was the one who went in and adjusted the emission side of the things where it was out of compliance, that would still go back onto the manufacturer. So that's an issue that when we start talking about given specific information, computer codes, those type of things, that's a challenge with that, is that the EPA doesn't going to come back to me and say you may be the one that did it, but ultimately the manufacturer, whoever that manufacturer is, they're the ones that are held responsible for that, and they're the ones that have to make sure that no one does any adjustments on that to take them out of compliance. I think that's important for us to understand, and that goes to the complexity of things that we're talking about before. Currently, the diagnostic software is available on most all the manufacturers, so you can download the diagnostic systems. You have to pay for them, but sure, you can download that diagnostic software in order to use on your machine to figure out what is happening to it, what it is, or your local mechanic, your local shop. They can have that diagnostic equipment or that diagnostic computer program to identify what it is. And majority of the things is what I'm being told, the majority of the things, failures on equipment is not necessarily computer. So if you can diagnose the issue, majority of the issues that we have, it's going to be something you can repair, you can fix. So we really don't have, I think the stick has moved significantly over the last few years as to what you as an individual can do with your equipment as newer equipment come up. Senator Dorn spoke about it a little bit ago. I'll talk about that again. As we get into self-propelled or autonomous type vehicles, turn around at the end of the row, whatever it might be, that's getting into some more significant computer software that's going to be needed, and I'm not so sure that's something that without specific training being done and schooling being done through the manufacturer that's certified. I think when you talk about cars and automobiles and trucks like that, I think it's ASCE, or there's certain certifications you can go and get, and perhaps that's exactly where this could go. This is that direction this needs to go, is that those shops that are out there, those mechanics that are out there, they can go out and get certified, go to specific trainings, get certified on this equipment to work on it.
1 minute.
The question came up with a little bit with parts. Where do parts come from? I think that's probably an issue that is being dealt with, as well as, you want to make sure you get the right parts. Who's going to do this? The manufacturer going to bring those out or a third party. Right now, I think it's a manufacturer, the one that needs to or has those parts out there. And so those are things that, as they're talking about at the federal level, those in that MOU, those are the things that they're talking about right now. How does that happen? How do our local technicians, our local mechanics, local shops, or ourselves or our hired hands get certified in this equipment? You can download it, you can diagnostic, you can find out what's wrong with the machine, and you can repair most of it now. But I think to go that next step, as we were talking about before, if this is a piece
Senator.
of equipment, thank you.
Thank you, Senator Bossman. Senator Dorn, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you guys for the conversation. It was a little bit interesting listening there when Senator Erdman was talking to Senator Brandt about our tractor test lab here in Nebraska, which is, I call it world renowned or world known, and the ability that they have out there and all that they've done. But I know Senator Erdman asked the question of why would somebody come and do that, or why wouldn't they do that? Well, I call it if the profitability's there, they're going to want to do that and be here in Nebraska. And I think Senator Slummer early on, I don't remember the exact numbers, but she talked about the amount or the stuff that we all do in Nebraska. We are, I think, third maybe in corn production, and we rank up there high in bean production, which requires all of this type of equipment. This right to repair then becomes involved in that as we talk about it. And as I've grown up over the years, and we grew up with, well, my dad started farming with horses. I started with, I call it tractors without cabs. And today we are at the stage where if you wanted to buy a tractor, a brand new tractor that most people would use to pull the size of equipment we have today, you're talking probably a minimum of $300,000 to $500,000. And if you're looking at a combine, you're looking at probably for all of the combine and the heads, if you're looking at list price, you're looking at over $500,000. Some of those, one of the equipment dealers, the brand new combine they came out with listed for over $1 million. So we've had some good discussions here tonight, and Senator Flood, I really enjoyed some of his questions and thoughts on it's not only in the farming industry, but it's also in, I call it the radio industry, and how we've evolved over time and where we've came from 20, 50 years ago and to where we are today. Why is this important about the right to repair today? Because we have gone slowly down a path where it has become very, very challenging for some of these farmers, some of these people that I call it are their own mechanics or a neighbor mechanic, and getting that equipment repaired. And as I always like to talk on the mic here, and when I talk the finances, looking out there 2 years and 5 years and 10 years. And I guess the question I have, where will we be at in 10 years? What will this look like? Will this be everybody has to bring everything to the local dealer? Or will there still be some availability or some, I call it, possibility of having a repair shop in the area or a neighbor repair shop? Visit a little bit about the auto industry. Senator Brandt talked about in 2012, I forget which state, I think Massachusetts or somebody passed the MOU, and then what that's evolved in the car industry. Well, most places, our town, most little towns have a auto repair or a car repair facility. The one in our town, people often complain about he has too much business. He has to park cars along the street where he shouldn't park. So that part has still gone on, and they are able to work on many of these vehicles, and they are able to, I call it, repair many of these cars. So that part has evolved, and then why or how comes or what has been the hang-up of, I call it, bringing in the farm aspect of this into that right to repair or that same type MOU.
1 minute.
And where is the holdup or where is the hang-up of why this isn't progressing at the rate or coming to something like the auto dealers or the car makers have or whatever. So it's been a very interesting discussion the last couple of years, and to see where Senator Brandt brought this bill originally, where we are at today, and to have this discussion on the floor for me has been very, very exciting, and I will yield the rest of my time back to the chair.
Thank you, Senator Dorn. Senator Lowe, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I was just thinking, as technology advances, so does the automobile industry. What do we do about Tesla? Can you take a Tesla into a third-party dealership to have them fix the motor, the battery? I don't think so. As Senator Moser just said, if you stick a screwdriver into that place in the wrong place, you could send yourself to orbit. So I'd like to continue reading of the testifiers. My name is Mark Hennessy. I'm the president and CEO of Iowa and Nebraska Equipment Dealers Association. And you've heard from two of our members about association here today. I think we are all in this room and trying to accomplish the same thing. And I do believe that on this legislative floor. We don't want to have a producer unable to operate their equipment in the field. We want them to be able to harvest. We want them to be able to plant. And if they want to be able to repair their equipment, we want them able to, and we want to be able to support that repair. We are all after the same objective. The question you raised earlier, Senator, and I'm not sure which senator raised this question, was that they aren't aware that they can already do this. I think when you hear and what you've heard about our products that are currently available in the market today, producers can buy diagnostic tools, equipment software subscriptions, much the same as an independent repair or dealer themselves. This is available for them to be able to do themselves if they wish. The question becomes, why aren't they doing this? Well, they can if they desire. They can if they desire. So they already can do this. It really does boil down to the awareness of the issue. Are they aware that these tools exist? Why are we needing to have legislation for something that's currently on the market today? So I think the crux of the matter is to crystallize it as to how we create better awareness. Do we do that through legislation, or do we do that through communication? What is the best way we can accomplish this objective? Because we are all after the same thing. And that's trying to make sure that our producers in Nebraska can be able to plant 24/7, or whatever schedule they want to be able to get their crop in the field or harvest on time. That's what our producers want to have. That's what our dealers are striving for. That's what the OEMs have been able to provide, those tools and diagnostic capabilities for all of us to be able to do. So I just want to close that we're all after the same objective. We don't believe we need to have legislation to accomplish the ability to the right to repair, because the products are available on the market today. We don't have legislation to create awareness. That's a challenge that we have to do, and we have to do better job of it. But that's where we really like to be able to step up and make sure that we are looking at this bill from the lens of, are we doing the thing right? And if we can improve, we certainly are open to that. We don't think legislation is needed. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We don't think legislation is needed in order to get that accomplished. So I think what the dealers and the association is saying is this is already out there, that the producers can repair the vehicles themselves. They just have to pony up and buy the software or buy the equipment to do it. So, do we need this legislation? Senator Brandt, I thank you for bringing the legislation to be making us become aware of it, and that we need to continue to bring awareness to the producers out there that they already are able to do this. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Senator Lowe. Senator Aguilar, you're recognized.
Question.
Question's been called. Do I see 5 hands? I do. The question is, shall debate cease? All those in favor vote aye. All those opposed vote nay. Have all those voted who wish to? Please record, Mr. Clerk.
13 ayes, 5 nays to cease debate, Mr. President.
Debate does not cease. Returning to debate. Senator Salami, you recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good evening, colleagues. I'm going to get back to where I left off on my last turn on the mic with Aaron Porter's testimony before the Missouri House on HB 975, which is almost identical to LB543. And he's a farmer. He has a lot of experience in this field, so I do think this testimony is valuable because it hits on a lot of the key issues and concerns I have with the route that LB543 is taking. Again, Senator Brandt and I are on the same page about the federal MOU. I think it absolutely needs to happen. And he has pointed out an issue that is very real and very expensive for our farmers. I just, again, disagree with going about it through LB543. So this is Aaron Porter's testimony. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Aaron Porter, and I'm a cotton, corn, and soybean farmer from Dexter. I've been farming in Stoddard County now for 20 years and have owned, operated, and maintained farm machinery just as long. I oppose HB 975 and would like to take a moment to share why I believe it is wrong for Missouri's farmers. I support every farmer's right to repair and maintain their own equipment. However, HB 975 has gone far beyond right to repair. If it were simply about the right to repair, it would be unnecessary because the ability exists today for me as a customer or an independent repair person to purchase the same diagnostic equipment, software, and wiring harnesses that John Deere dealers purchase for their factory-trained technicians. After talking to my local dealer, I found out that for a fee and a yearly subscription, anyone can diagnose and repair a wide array of John Deere equipment complete with periodic software updates and IT support. In preparing for this committee hearing, I wanted to make sure that what I am telling you is true, so I looked into it. I called 3 dealerships from 3 different owner groups in southeast Missouri and found that that indeed I could obtain the capability to diagnose and repair my own equipment if I so choose. However, diagnostic data is not all HB 975 seeks to access. The bill is written so that equipment manufacturers would be required to divulge embedded code that even factory-trained technicians at your local dealer does not have access to today. This code would allow the user to manipulate performance and safety parameters for the equipment they are servicing. This manipulation of a tractor, for example, would result in several possible outcomes that would have safety, liability, and equipment value implications. I would like to share a couple examples of 2 possible scenarios. These are real, and I promise you will result from such access being granted regardless of what the proponents of the bill will tell you. A practice common in the diesel pickup world, known as chipping or tuning, would be possible and probable if this legislation passes. This practice generally increases horsepower to levels that will cause powertrain failure and defeats emission control components that result in a violation of federal law. Several problems arise with the manipulation of this nature. First, there are no physical indicators that express an alteration of code has occurred. Farm equipment manufacturers spend millions of research and design dollars to build tractors capable of handling the power they produce. When tractors under heavy load put out more power than the drivetrain can handle, components tend to fail. This, I believe, will have a negative impact on the value of used equipment. Unless a buyer knows a seller, how can they have the confidence they are not buying a piece of equipment that has been manipulated and abused? Secondly, thank you, Mr. President. There is a liability issue that arises with such a manipulation. If an owner of a tractor violates federal law by disabling emission controls and trades that tractor, and then the buyer of that tractor is caught with the tractor out of compliance, who is liable? Remember, there is no visible way for the new owner to identify that a manipulation of code has occurred. Guess who will be paying a very hefty fine? I'll continue with this second point on my next turn on the mic. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Slama. Senator Sanders, you recognize?
I yield my time to Senator Slama. Thank you.
Senator Slama, 455.
Thank you, Senator Sanders. I appreciate that, and I appreciate the discussion on LB543. I'm really grateful for these ag-related days. We don't get many of them unless we're talking about property taxes. So to have an ag-related bill and to be able to have so many of the farmers on the floor share their expertise and some of their concerns and points of support for LB543 is good for me to see. So continuing on with Aaron Porter's testimony before the Missouri House on HB 975, which is very similar to LB 543. I was about most of the way through, so I'll just wrap that up on this turn on the mic and ask Senator Hughes, if he's available, a question. Just give him a heads up. Another potential scenario involves a real annoying safety feature of harvesting machines, a feature I may add that has saved countless life and limbs. Operator presence sensors in the seat of combines and cotton pickers sense that the operator is seated and in control of his or her machine. If the operator gets out of the seat, the machine immediately disables harvesting operations. This feature is present to reduce the potential for the operator to injure themselves in the various moving components on the harvester and its row units or header. Manufacturers build these safety features and others into their products, making them safer to operate, even though many operators may find it annoying or cumbersome. This is a feature that, if this bill passes, can be overridden, and accidents will happen, threatening the safety of the operator and those that will follow during the life of the machine, decreasing the safety of the machines and increasing liability for the farmers that own them. These are just a few of the several examples I could share with you today on the negative implications for Missouri farmers if HB 975 passes. I urge the members of this committee to carefully consider this proposal, and I appreciate the opportunity to provide input for the committee's consideration. And Mr. President, I'd like to see if Senator Hughes would be willing to yield to a question.
Senator Hughes, would you yield?
Of course.
Thank you, Senator Hughes. So what are your thoughts on LB 543? I want to make sure that you, as a farmer on the floor, an experienced farmer on the floor, had a chance to share your thoughts on this.
Thank you, Senator Slama. I appreciate that. I am opposed to LB 543, and there are several reasons. It's been a good discussion, and while I was in the chair, I do have to pay attention to everything that's being said, and I appreciate all the different points of view. But trying to compare today's farm equipment with cars or pickups, that's apples and oranges. You know, cars and pickups get us from point A to point B. Farm equipment, whether it's a combine or a swather or a tractor, there's a lot more involved. It's not only getting us from point A to point B, but it's doing a lot of work in the meantime. If you take a combine, there are multiple computers on that combine, and there are a lot more moving parts. You know, it's not only stripping the crop from the head or from the plant, it's thrashing that crop, managing the residue, cleaning that crop, storing it until it can be offloaded. There's a lot of different operations that are going on at the same time. So comparing cars and farm equipment is not even close to the same thing. On one of our tractors, you know, the tractor is pulling our implement from point A to point B across the field, but we've got 3 to 7 different hydraulic outlets hooked up doing many different things. It's driving the planting device, it's driving the fertilizer pump, it's driving the transmission, and all that is being monitored at a different on different monitors at different rates that are doing different things. So this is very complicated equipment, and I'm very appreciative of the manufacturers of the millions, probably hundreds of millions of dollars that they've invested in this technology, and they deserve a return on that. And as a farmer who takes advantage of those opportunities that modern equipment gives us, I am very appreciative because it allows me to be much more effective, much more productive. And that's been the driving factor. We don't have farm kids like we did, so each person on the farm has to do more. And the way we do more is by buying modern equipment that allows us to do more with less manpower. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Hughes, Senator Slama, and Senator Sanders. Senator Williams, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I think Senator Hughes is on a roll. I'll just yield him my time.
Senator Hughes, 4 minutes, 52.
Thank you, Senator Williams. I do appreciate that. As I said, I've been in the chair for quite a while and have wanted to weigh in and got here as quickly as I could. But as I'll call it significant size farmer, we do have multiple pieces of equipment and we are very frustrated when something breaks down. I mean, I am not someone, you know, I'd like new paint because when I want to work, when the window of opportunity is open for me to harvest or plant, I want that piece of equipment to go. But if you're a farmer that's having trouble with your dealer and your equipment's down for 2 or 3 days, you better find a different dealer, or you better find a different piece of equipment. There's quality equipment out there. Yes, it does cost, but you've got to be able to keep up with the times and make sure that you have got the support network. Senator Dorn has talked about the price of equipment, and he's somewhat low in some of his estimates of what today's equipment costs. But that goes back to how much productivity we have, and that productivity costs money. And our manufacturers have invested hundreds of millions of dollars in that technology. And one of the pieces that I really marvel at is our satellite guidance. You know, we have guidance for all of our equipment. You know, God forbid the guidance goes down, nobody knows how to drive anything anymore. But that convenience, that value comes at the end of the day, because if you're driving, concentrating on going straight, after 8-10 hours, you're wore out. But if you don't have to concentrate on that and the machine is doing it for you, you've got 10, 12, 14 hours that you can be in that piece of equipment and not be as drained at the end of the day. And you are more productive because you can concentrate on the operation that you're doing, not on where you're driving, not keeping that straight line. You can analyze the rest of the machine. On our combines, we've got opportunities to shift things on the go. And that's incredible technology, but that takes computerization and getting back to the point where car dealers, mom and pop auto shops can do these changes. It's apples and oranges. Downtime is very, very expensive, and we've been frustrated. We had one of our combines down for a couple of days this last harvest, corn harvest, I believe, because there was a part missing. That was supply chain issues. And I'm not going to say what color we drive, but the color we have, they do a very good job of servicing their customers. Our local dealer does a very good job of making sure they've got quality mechanics and they pay them well, and yes, we do pay a large bill when it comes for those mechanics to come to our operation. But what is our time worth? That one combine that we've got today does more than 3 did when I was a little kid. That's 2 less individuals that have got to be out there, and it's certainly a lot nicer place to work with the cab and air conditioning and radio. You're not sitting out eating dirt for 10 hours a day. What is that worth? What is that worth to today's farmer? We are the most efficient farmers in the world in this country because we have the technology that our equipment manufacturers have invested in to help us be that way. We are not the least cost operators, producers in the world, because our infrastructure and our government regulation causes our costs to go up, but we are the most efficient operators. And that's something to be very proud of. We have the most abundant, safest, cleanest food supply in the world, and that's something we should be proud of. And that's not just the farmers, that's the equipment manufacturers, that's the truckers, that's the railroads, that's everybody. It takes a lot of people to make this thing work. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Hughes. Senator Williams. Senator Clements, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. This has been a concern of mine. I know that I talked to Senator Friesen. He said he had bought a $1,200 part, put it in his combine himself, and then the combine gave an error that it was a foreign part, couldn't be repaired until a technician authorized it. And so this is a concern. I can see I've got an independent mechanic in my hometown that I hope he still can get access to these. But I'd like to yield the rest of my time to Senator Brandt.
Senator Brandt, 420.
Thank you, Senator Clements. I'll probably be the last speaker on this, so everybody in the room knows what's going on. We've had a very productive discussion. It looks like this is going to get filibustered. That's just the way it goes sometimes, but we might be bringing this back next year. I guess my interest is we had a very robust discussion about technology in agriculture, and in Nebraska that's critical. Hopefully some of the people out there got the message that we aren't going away. So a lot of this had to deal with source code or intellectual property theft. This bill's got nothing to do with that. This bill is basically about getting the equipment to work. Farmers out there have been lockstep with the dealers on working together. I can tell you if you have a monitor that takes cables or if you have a guidance system that needs work, it's a team effort. And this is not an attack on the dealers. This is not an attack on the OEMs. This is just sort of shows mission creep. There are certain original equipment manufacturers out there that have made it very, very difficult to work with farmers, and other ones have been outstanding. And this kind of was to level the playing field. It doesn't look like we're going to get a shot on that, and that's fine. For those of you that are interested, when I opened, I did mention that there were 11 class action lawsuits against John Deere. All of those were filed this year by farmers. You can look it up online. I've got one here. It's 48 pages. It does an outstanding job of outlining what the problem is. I would guess that down the road these will be consolidated into one class action, so maybe farmers need to be aware of that. Data, we talked about data. We hit a little bit on cyber. So this is the world we live in today. If something would happen to our satellites, think how many planters or tractors wouldn't be able to go forward. We don't use markers anymore. We use satellites to plant with. And if we're getting to these autonomous tractors and a lot of our cars and stuff like that, guys, we lose the satellites, you're going to be SOL. That's a fact of the matter. So anyway, With that, thank you everybody for what? Nah, thank you everybody for all your help on that, and I'll give the rest of my time back to the president.
Thank you, Senator Brandt and Senator Clements. Mr. Clerk, for items.
Mr. President, explanation of vote from Senator Michaela Cavanaugh. Series of name adds: Senator Vargas to 721, Moorfeld 852, Slama, Wishart, Brewer, Blood, Breesy, Williams, Jacobson, Moser, McDonald, Coulterman, Lowe, Gregert, Dorn, Aguilar, Clements to LR 427. Mr. President, Senator John Kavanaugh would move to adjourn the body until Friday, April 8 at 9:00 a.m.
Colleagues, you've heard the motion. All those in favor say aye. Opposed say nay. We are adjourned.